In December 2023, the Shuja'Iyya neighborhood, one of the most densely populated districts of Gaza City, became the epicenter of one of the fiercest battles of the conflict. It was the last significant stronghold in eastern North Gaza that Israeli forces had not yet fully brought under their control. Following weeks of intense shelling and relentless airstrikes that had already scarred the landscape, Israeli troops initiated a ground advance from the south on December 4th. This is the story of a grueling, nearly 3-week urban battle where the cramped, labyrinthine terrain and heavily fortified positions transformed every street, every alley, and every building into a potential death trap. Shuja'Iyya, an old and historic neighborhood, is characterized by thousands of low-rise buildings packed tightly together, forming a maze of narrow streets that challenge conventional military movement. This dense urban fabric provided a formidable defensive advantage. Palestinian armed forces, primarily composed of the Qassam brigades, had meticulously prepared their defensive positions, leveraging the familiar environment of homes, shops, and public buildings as bastions and firing points. They had spent time turning the neighborhood into a fortress, anticipating the advance. On the opposing side, the Israeli military committed significant assets to the operation, deploying infantry divisions including the elite Golani Brigade, supported by Merkava tanks and overwhelming air power, with the explicit objective of clearing the area of armed resistance. The stage was set for a brutal confrontation, a microcosm of modern urban warfare where technological superiority would be pitted against entrenched defenders who held the advantage of terrain. The first phase of the battle commenced with a devastating display of firepower. From December 4th to December 12th, a heavy and sustained artillery barrage rained down on Shuja'Iyya, aimed at softening defensive positions and creating pathways for the advancing ground forces. Under the cover of this bombardment, Israeli forces pushed deep into the district. The advance was methodical but perilous. Tanks and infantry units moved cautiously through the ruined streets, their progress impeded by rubble and the constant threat of attack. They immediately encountered stiff resistance, with small arms fire erupting from shattered windows and concealed positions.
Ow!
The distinct sound of Lesin 105 anti-tank rockets echoed through the narrow corridors, followed by the percussive blasts of RPGs. Black smoke billowed into the sky from armored vehicles that had been struck, their thick armor tested by close-range volleys. The defenders, intimately familiar with the neighborhood's layout, utilized its density to their full advantage. They would emerge from tunnels or buildings to launch swift, close-range attacks on the advancing columns before melting back into the urban labyrinth, disappearing into other structures or a network of prepared tunnels. This hit-and-run strategy made it exceptionally difficult for the Israeli forces to establish a secure front line. Above Israeli air support was a constant presence, with jets and drones circling, ready to drop bombs on suspected positions identified by ground troops. However, the very nature of the terrain that favored the defenders also complicated the effectiveness of air power. The narrow streets and multi-story buildings made it dangerous to call in strikes without risking. Friendly fire and the defenders' ability to quickly change locations meant that by the time a target was confirmed, they had often already moved. The initial week of fighting was a grinding, street-by-street affair marked by intense, sporadic firefights and the slow, costly advance of the attacking force. The main and most brutal phase of the battle unfolded over 2 days, marking the climax of the intense engagement. On December 12th and 13th, the fighting reached a new level of ferocity. Golani Brigade forces, having penetrated the outer defenses, pushed toward the center of Shuja'Iyya with the mission of systematically sweeping and clearing the buildings believed to be command centers and strongholds. As an Israeli infantry unit infiltrated a building complex they believed to be a key fortification, they walked directly into a meticulously planned ambush. The moment they entered, the trap was sprung. The air was instantly filled with a storm of gunfire from multiple directions, and grenades were thrown into their midst, creating chaos and confusion. Simultaneously, the defenders detonated pre-planted booby traps, triggering powerful explosions that caused a section of the building to collapse, trapping the initial assault team and crushing some of the soldiers who were attempting to provide rescue and support. The situation deteriorated rapidly into a desperate close-quarters fight for survival. Senior Israeli officers, including a battalion commander and a company commander, led a counterattack, rushing headlong into the kill zone under a hail of heavy gunfire. in a desperate attempt to rescue their trapped and wounded comrades. The combat was intimate and savage, lasting for hours. Shouts from commanders mingled with the continuous rattle of automatic weapons and the deafening blasts from booby-trapped buildings that the defenders detonated remotely. The Israeli forces called for urgent air and tank support to suppress the ambushers. But the constricted urban environment severely limited the effectiveness of these heavy assets. Tanks struggled to maneuver in the narrow alleys. The risk of causing further building collapses on their own troops made the use of aerial bombs a perilous choice. This two-day period encapsulated the brutal reality of urban warfare, where prepared defenses and the element of surprise could momentarily neutralize a technologically superior force, inflicting significant casualties and turning a planned advance into a chaotic struggle for survival. Following the intense and costly climax of the battle, the final phase focused on consolidating control and methodically eliminating the remaining pockets of resistance. From December 21st to December 26th, Israeli forces declared they had gained operational control over the core of the Shuja'Iyya neighborhood. Their operation shifted from large-scale advances to a more granular, house-by-house clearing process. During this period, they located and captured what was described as the local battalion headquarters of the Palestinian armed groups. Uncovering a network of command bunkers and tunnels, troops systematically destroyed numerous bunkers, weapons depots, and tunnel shafts that had been used by the defenders throughout the battle. The sweep was meticulous and slow, with soldiers moving cautiously through the ruins, collecting documents, intelligence materials, and eliminating the last vestiges of organized resistance. By December 26, the Israeli military announced the withdrawal of its main combat troops from Shuja'Iyya, declaring that the local battalion had been effectively defeated and its command structure dismantled. What they left behind was a scene of utter devastation. The neighborhood, once a vibrant and densely populated urban center, lay in ruins. Hundreds of buildings were either completely destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. Their skeletal remains a testament to the intensity of the fighting. The human cost was severe. The Israeli military acknowledged heavy losses, particularly from the ambush on December 12th and 13th, with official reports confirming the deaths of approximately 10 soldiers, including several high-ranking officers from the Golani Brigade and its supporting units. On the other side, Israeli military statements claimed that hundreds of Palestinian fighters had been eliminated during the weeks of combat. The battle for Shuja'Iyya had concluded, but its scars, both physical and human, would remain deeply etched into the landscape of Gaza. An analysis of the events in Shuja'Iyya reveals a textbook case of modern urban warfare, highlighting the inherent asymmetries and challenges that define such conflicts. The attacking force, Israel, leveraged its overwhelming superiority in air power, armor, and technology to systematically bombard and penetrate the district. The strategy was to overwhelm the defenders with firepower, degrade their fortifications, and create conditions for a ground advance. However, the unique characteristics of the urban environment, the dense maze of buildings, its narrow streets, and the defenders' intricate network of tunnels and booby traps acted as a great equalizer. This terrain significantly slowed the Israeli advance, funneled their armored vehicles into predictable kill zones, and ultimately led to high casualties, especially during close-quarters combat. The defending side, in turn, masterfully exploited these terrain advantages. They employed classic guerrilla tactics, utilizing their intimate knowledge of the area to stage close-range ambushes with anti-tank rockets and small arms before disappearing back into the urban jungle. Their use of pre-planned booby traps and fortified buildings inflicted heavy damage and psychological stress on the advancing troops, demonstrating how a less technologically advanced force can effectively counter a superior enemy in a prepared defensive environment. The battle was a brutal illustration of attrition, where every meter of ground was paid for in blood and destruction. So why was the Battle of Shuja'Iyya important, beyond the Israeli side's eventual temporary control and subsequent withdrawal? It stands as one of the most intense and symbolic battles of the early ground campaign in Gaza, serving as a stark illustration of the profound challenges and high costs associated with dense urban warfare in the 21st century. The significant losses sustained by elite Israeli units, particularly the Golani Brigade, forced a tactical reassessment on the Israeli side, influencing how they approached subsequent operations in other densely populated areas. Persistent and fierce resistance encountered in Shuja'Iyya demonstrated that achieving definitive military objectives in such an environment is a complex and costly endeavor, often falling short of complete and lasting victory. The fight for Shuja'Iyya became a symbol of fierce resistance and the brutal nature of the wider conflict. The Battle of Shuja'Iyya serves as a powerful and sobering reminder that in the complex, three-dimensional chess game of urban environments, factors like terrain, local knowledge, and defensive preparations can fundamentally alter the dynamics and outcome of a military campaign.